I chose to do my project on New Zealand. So let's jump right into it. I think it's a perfect location for any movie. And this is based off of other movies choosing this location for themselves to make movies, such as The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, which were great movies, the classic movies. Let's move right into it. Geography. New Zealand is a land of great contrast and diversity. Active volcanoes, spectacular caves, deep glacier lakes, verdant valleys, dazzled fjords, and long sandy beaches, and the spectacular snow-capped peaks of the Southern Alps on the South Island. They all contribute to New Zealand's scenic beauty. New Zealand also has a unique array of vegetation and animal life, much of which developed during the country's prolonged isolation. It is the sole home, for example, of the long-beaked flightless kiwi. It's a nickname for New Zealanders, which is the Kiwis. Right? So let's move on to the next slide. Climate. New Zealand's climate is determined by its latitude. It's kind of isolated in its physical characteristics. There are a few temperature extremes, but not too much. For the most part, it's pretty chill. There's some high pressure systems, cyclones that happen there. There also is spells of fine weather and intense sunshine. In the winter months, the middle latitude lows and the active fronts increase, and there are a big wet condition. They kind of have like a rainy season almost. Changes in elevation make for a different kind of pattern in temperature variation. So like there's a big mountainous terrain when it comes to there. Very beautiful if we're looking for scenic things to shoot. For sure. The climate in the 21st century is expected to affect temperature and precipitation patterns in New Zealand. These changes are expected to be more moderate than compared to global changes. So New Zealand is kind of it's one of the more perfect places in terms of temperature, and you kind of have like a variety of different locations that you can go to with different climates at those different locations. The next we have is the government structure. Now, New Zealand has a parliamentary form of government, which is based off of the British model. Legislative power is vested in a single-chamber House of Representatives, which is the Parliament, the members of which are elected for 3 terms. The political party or coalition of parties that commands a majority in the House forms the government. Generally, the leader of the government party becomes the prime minister. The prime minister is the person responsible for different aspects of the government, in terms of like the forms of the cabinet and whatnot. The cabinet is the central organ of the executive power. Most legislation is initiated in the House on the basis of decisions made by the cabinet. Parliament must then pass by the majority vote before it can become a law. The cabinet has extensive regulatory powers that are subject to only limited parliamentary review. Because the cabinet ministers sit in the House, and because the party discipline is customarily strong, legislative and executive authorities are effectively fused. Right? So the British monarch is the formal head of state in New Zealand and is represented by a governor-general appointed by the monarch on a recommendation of the New Zealand government to a 5-year term. The governor-general has limited authority, with the office retaining some residual powers to protect the Constitution and to act in a situation of constitutional crisis. To give an example, the Governor-General can dissolve Parliament under certain circumstances. Let's move on to the next slide. The next slide is currency. So the form of currency that New Zealand has is the New Zealand dollar. And we're looking at about 1 US dollar is 1.5 New Zealand dollars. So if you have 1 New Zealand dollar, it's about 0.6, 0.5 USD. So when you go over there, you're going to be losing some money. Let's move on into the GDP trend. The New Zealand economy advanced 6% on the quarter in the fourth quarter of 2018. They had a 0.38% expansion in the previous period, matching market forecasts. The trend just seems to be going up and increasing. Move on to the next slide. GDP per capita. Okay, so the gross domestic product per capita in New Zealand was last recorded at $37,852.87 US. That was in 2017. The GDP per capita in New Zealand is equivalent to 300% of the world's average, which is pretty interesting. GDP per capita in New Zealand averaged at about 27,661 US dollars from 1970 until 1917. So you saw about a $10,000 increase from the average of 1970 to 2017 in 2017 alone, which is pretty astounding. It's reaching an all-time high of that 37,000, almost 38,000 of the record in 1917. Let's move on to the next slide. Wealth distribution. So the net worth of the richest 20% of New Zealand households has risen 394,000 since 2015 to reach a median of 1.75 million. Over the same period, from the year ending June 2015 to June 2018, the net worth of the bottom 40% has not increased. So the rich are getting richer and the poor are staying poor. The median net worth of a typical Kiwi, which is a New Zealander, in June, this is the household, a New Zealand household, in June of 2018 was $340,000, up to $289,000 from 3 years ago. Mainly reflecting the property values, the median means half of all the households are richer and half of the poorer than this value. The median net worth of the top 20% of surveyed New Zealand households has increased about $131,000 a year. This equates to almost $360 every day for the past 3 years. That is an insane number to think about in terms of the wealth distribution and how it's completely uneven and how the wealthy keep on getting wealthier. Let's move on into enemies. Okay, although in the past New Zealand has gone through times where they had enemies, the current climate is one of peace. Back in the day in World War II, we had a lot of issues with New Zealand. Now there's none of that. They're peaceful. There's trades. There's no embargoes. It's a great place for us to shoot our movie. Let's talk about the labor force compensation. New Zealand evolved a system of compulsory arbitration in which the government played a major role. From the late 1960s, the government policy generally alternated between periods of government-imposed freezes on wages and prices and periods of official tolerated bargaining between unions and employers. Although the strong link between the laborers' markets of the New Zealand and Australia, especially in the skilled trades and professional vocations, constrained policy, however, after the passage of the Employment Contracts Act of 1991, it ended all of that. It ended union membership, and the union members fell dramatically. It was a crisis. So the labor force, there were unions, now there's not, and it's kind of like a slippery slope. Let's move on to inflation rate. The annual inflation rate in New Zealand fell to 1.5% in the first quarter of 2019, and it fell from 1.9%. The market expectations were going to go to about 1.7%. The slowdown was mainly driven by a fall in cost of transportation, communication, and household contents and services. Next slide. Infrastructure. In spite of the rugged nature of the country, which we talked about earlier, most of the inhabited areas of New Zealand is readily accessible. we're talking they have good road systems in rural districts, and the main cities have express highway systems. Through the different terrain, there is train services. So we have all different kinds of transportation and infrastructure and roadways. It's pretty spectacular, but it's also one of the last places where we can get some really nice wildlife and movie shots. So let's move into exports. 1 second here. All right. So the main exports of New Zealand in 2017. This is the latest report that I could receive. New Zealand exported $37.3 billion, making it the 57th largest exporter in the world during the last 5 years. And the exports of New Zealand have decreased at a rate of negative 0.3% from $38 billion in 2012 to what it is currently. The most recent exports are led by concentrated milk, which represent 14.3% of the total exports of New Zealand, followed by sheep and goat meat, which accounted for 6.33%. Then we're also looking at frozen bovine meat, butter, cheese, milk, honey, fish, whey, wine, malt extract, rough-wood, etc. Now let's move on to imports. Imports. In 2017, New Zealand imported $36.3 billion, making it the 56th largest importer in the world. During the last 5 years, the imports of New Zealand have decreased 0.5% from $37 billion. The most recent imports are cars and crude petroleum. We're also looking at computers, broadcasting equipment, delivery trucks, tractors, farming equipment, things of that nature. Let's move on. Population and demographic. The life expectancy in New Zealand is generally high, although it's lower than the rest of the world. The death rate is below the world average. Annual population growth fluctuates between generally low, comparable to that of other industrial Western countries. The natural rate of increase trends to be highest among the people of the Pacific Island heritage. Immigration plays a major factor. And it contributes to the overall population growth in New Zealand. And that has led to frequent debates about limiting immigration. Although the past, most immigrants came from Great Britain and the Netherlands, they have been surpassed by people from Pacific Islands and Asia. And Australia is the preferred destination of immigrants, honestly. Both immigration and immigration are sensitive to the rate of growth of the New Zealand economy and its employable opportunities, as well as conditions overseas. The cost to get there, a round-trip ticket to Auckland from Orlando, if you were to leave tomorrow, will cost you $1,409 US. Let's wrap this up. Why I selected New Zealand. I feel like the cost to get there, not that bad in comparison to what you get out of it. The rural aspect, you get to be in an economy that's not, it's not going to break the budget. You're going to be in a place where amazing movies have already been filmed, so you're going to get what you pay for. And I think it's the best choice.